a big innovation partnership. But I'm really here to help enable these fantastic speakers to talk a little bit about their experiences and to really try and address this issue of how do we finance the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement. And so what we've got planned is for Professor Jeffrey Sachs to stand up and speak for a couple of minutes just to set the scene. We are hugely pleased to have Mahmoud to come in and speak from the high-level champions perspective, and we're very privileged. I know you're a phenomenally busy man, so thank you very much. And then after that, we'll be convening a panel of industrialists, venture funders, academics, to really get into the detail about how do we overcome some of the barriers to financing, and in particular to scaling up the finance that we need going forward. So without further ado, if I could ask Professor Sachs to say a few introductory words.
Thank you very much. We have a lot of wonderful people, so I'll be very, very brief. The Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement are an investment agenda. This is the most basic point. To achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, we need investments in education, in health, in clean energy, in sustainable agriculture, in urban infrastructure, in digital access. The question is mobilizing that financing. Clearly, several $1 trillion a year are needed for these investments. That's okay. World saving is on the scale of about $30 trillion per year, 25 to 30 trillion. The amounts that are needed are a few percent of world output per year to be mobilized for these purposes. It's not even that much in incremental amounts because we already invest 4 or 5 trillion a year in energy-related investments, but largely in fossil fuel investments in the past. Now it has to be rechanneled to the kinds of investments for a safe, clean, green energy system. There are two basic kinds of financing issues. In the rich countries, there's a lot of finance, but a lot of it is not well directed towards our needs. In other words, we have to shift from fossil fuel investing to clean, green investing in industry and also in sustainable agriculture. The second main problem in the world in investing is that the poorer half of the world, broadly speaking, the low-income countries and the lower middle-income countries, which are 82 countries that have 4 billion people combined, are deeply underinvested. They're poor because the capital is low, whether it's the human capital, meaning the past investments in education and health, or the physical infrastructure, or the business capital. Here's the basic problem. Capital flows to those who already have it. That's the basic point. If you are the US government, you can borrow 30 years at 3%. Maybe now it's 3.5%. Germany can borrow 30 years at an even lower rate. If you are Ghana and you want to borrow 30 years, you're told forget it, but we have a loan for you for 5 years, it's 12%. That's the basic problem. If you're poor, you can't borrow. If you're Elon Musk, you can borrow $44 billion to buy Twitter, or much of that financed not out of his pocket, but out of borrowing from banks. So the international system does not bring capital in two basic ways: to the public goods that we need in the rich countries and to half the world, which has no investment grade, cannot borrow, and therefore is poor. And we're really cruel in this world, because if you read what I do for a living, IMF agreements, when you read the agreement as it's signed, it's impossible to have development under that agreement. There's not enough finance in that agreement to actually educate the kids, have a health system, and electrify the economy. That's the basic problem. Okay, I've always been interested in the second problem more than the first problem. The first problem annoys the hell out of me, if I could put it that way. I live in a rich country. What's the matter with my country? Get on with it. It's ridiculous that the United States, it's so rich you can't even imagine, but it's so ridiculously corrupted and short-sighted and unfair, blah, blah, blah. True, all of it. But the real problem is poor people, because they're suffering terribly, and we can help solve all these problems with more investment. So the question is how to mobilize more saving for poor countries. Market solutions, unless someone's really clever, has to solve the problem of the fact that half the world doesn't have a credit rating of investment grade. So don't tell me all your great solutions if in the end the capital's not going to flow to those countries. And there's a concept called the credit ceiling, which is that if your sovereign is not investment grade, your whole private sector is not investment grade. Look it up at Fitch or S&P or Moody's. It's the rule. Okay, so that's the biggest problem in my view that we face. And the question is, how are we going to solve that? Mahmoud and I work together on a basic idea, and Mahmoud has many great ideas, but one idea is that the international development system should be much larger than it is. The World Bank, the African Development Bank, the Islamic Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, the Latin American Development Fund, these are wonderful institutions. But you add up everything, and their total loan flow per year is about $100 billion, maybe $120 billion with the emergency COVID-related funding, or even a little bit higher. But the normal loan flow is $120 billion a year. How are we going to solve any problem at that level? Are you kidding? That's an 100 trillion world economy. So think of it, it's 0.1% of the world output, and that's our system to solve the problems for 4 billion people. And it doesn't work. And then we scratch our heads, why doesn't it work? And the answer is there's no money in it. And then you scratch your head, well, why isn't there any money in it? Well, because the US Treasury doesn't want a new capital increase of these institutions. Why? Because some Republican congressman from Iowa doesn't want it. Are you kidding? Is this how the world really works? Yes. But it can't be how the world really works, because we have actual billions of people at stake. And I'd like to introduce the congressman from Iowa to the 4 billion people so he can know what he's doing. Because that's how the system's really completely broken right now. So my idea, following Mahmoud's idea, is we need to expand, I'll say 10 times the scale of the international financial institutions. And by the way, that would mean, say, lending $1 trillion a year. They could do that. It would make perfect sense. It would actually end poverty. That's the World Bank's mission. Not to have a mission of having a mission, but actually to end poverty. And you could do it if the bank was operating not at 50 billion a year, but at 300 billion a year, 400 billion a year. Why not? So that's the basic issue. But the main point is the following, which is quite interesting. You can get more lending out of these institutions with a leverage of 4-to-1 or 5-to-1. All you need to do, you have to have paid-in capital, say, of an extra 100 billion shared among the rich world. That is 0.2% of their income, by the way, nothing, rounding error. And then they can leverage that 4 or 5 times because they borrow on the capital markets AA minus or AAA. I'm about to stop. So here's the real deal, everybody. We've got the money, we've got the technology, we have the pathways, we have a lot of clever people that have worked out everything, we have great companies ready to do everything. You need to put money behind it. Thank God you need to put money behind it, otherwise there'd be no role for economists. That's our only role, is to tell you one thing. Put the money behind it, and in this case, use the official institutions we invented 75 years ago for actual sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Inspiring talk. Dr. Mahmood.
Right, thank you so much. Could be just my good luck or otherwise that I had to speak after the formidable Professor Sachs. And one of the beautiful things that the preparation of COP27, that during the last few months, Professor Sachs, who happens to be one of the busiest persons on earth, dedicating time almost on bi-weekly basis to support the preparations of this COP and get not just Egypt, but the African developing economies engaged in solutions. Professor Sachs provide the rationale on why some people like me, when we describe the international finance architecture of being unfair, insufficient, and inefficient, why that is because just of what he said there. The inefficiency, he mentioned the cost of obtaining capital, but the inefficiency as well is another issue that increases the transaction cost. When typically for an advanced economy, if you have a decent project for climate or development and they are not in contradiction, it can take you a few weeks and few months to get it. Typically for some developing economies, it can take up to 2 to 3 years to obtain the funding. These are basically real examples, especially from small states and small islands and many of the developing economies. Have very specific proposals as outlined by Professor Sachs. We have less than 7 years remaining before the 2030 agenda. Every indicator, including the one that he supervises through SDSN, telling us that we are in trouble, including achieving extreme poverty. I remember I was in the room back in September 2015 in a special summit that launched the SDGs. People were optimistic then that extreme poverty could be eradicated and reaching zero by 2030. Now we are very far from it because of COVID, you can say, because of Ukraine, you can say, but even before that, we're not on track to achieving the SDG 1. And this is a proxy of many things that we did wrong, including lack of investment in human capital, investment in infrastructure, and investment in resilience. This needs to change. And the practical proposal, as outlined by Professor Sachs, that could really support as well another piece that he was part of when we were in Barbados, and Prime Minister Mayamotli had been sharing these ideas of how to fix not just the international financial architecture in terms of finance and transaction, lowering the transaction cost, but the governance of the international financial system and linking finance more formally to sustainable development as it should. The other thing, we have some existing vehicles in existence. Some people, I was surprised even to know that some people in some of the leading international institutions are not aware that a continent like Africa is not a continent of low-income countries anymore. It's middle-income countries. But as mentioned the other day by the president of South Africa, when you consider a country like South Africa or Egypt as a middle income, you say, hey, you don't need the support of IFIs anymore. You have market access, good luck. So Professor Sachs said, well, try your luck then in lower environment or lower interest rate, lower inflation environment, you can access finance. But now it's double digit. So the idea here is very simple. Sustainable finance is not in contradiction with development finance. Get either to support the work, either is dedicated to low-income countries. We can extend that to low middle-income countries. I have some sort of a hope that could be supported further by your voice, because the World Bank Group President Malpass, mentioned something about an initiative called SCALE. And that SCALE is basically about work for development and climate, and it is getting the same treatment for low income and middle income in terms of terms and conditions. That could be a start of a good thing that could happen. We can build up IDA, but not just IDA of the World Bank. We can do the same with the rest of the multilateral development banks. We can have a special window dedicated to the work of sustainability and development together, and pushing this agenda based on a metric of performance. Funding is there, the replenishment of IDA, the replenishment of Green Climate Fund, the capital increase of the African Development Bank, which is imminent, the request for empowering the World Bank, which is needed, could really have this kind of condition to extend finance to middle-income countries and to have some sort of assurances of speed and fairness when it comes to dealing with low and middle-income countries. That could really be a very practical, doesn't sound very ambitious because we're not going to be making a headline like creating a new institution, because that can get the attraction of the media. But now we are building on some of the existing institutions, complementing them with new initiatives like the carbon credit market initiative that we started with for Africa yesterday, like the debt reduction mechanisms and swaps, reductions of debt and investing in climate and nature. But fundamentally, all of these other initiatives are not going to get us the scale and the magnitude required to deal with existential crises like the climate change, or dealing with the problems related to lack of development finance and compromising every sustainable development goal that should be achieved. Having said that, I'm happy to work with you further, but we need your voice and your articulation, evidence-based at the country level, in order to make what Professor Sachs just shared with us, and that simple proposal, make IDA for all developing economies, low income and low middle income countries. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed. So we've had two very inspiring talks about the challenge that we are facing and particular opportunities that we could have to solve them. What we've got now is a fantastic, a stellar panel who I really want to just dig into the practice, the practical issues about how do we overcome some of these issues. Because one of the, what we have heard a lot for far too long are restatements of the problem. So what it was great to hear from Dr. Mahmoud, from Professor Sachs is, okay, here's a route through, here's a way forward to try and implement and seek change. What I'm going to do is ask a number of the individuals. So I'm going to actually start with Géraldine, if I can. Géraldine is Picaud is the group CFO for Holcim. And I really want to just start with, given some of the industry interests on the sector, which is, what is your experience? What's your experience as a company, as a sector, in terms of getting the long-term finance and the scale of finance to deliver that transformational change, that journey that you have been on?
Thank you very much, and I think it's a great forum to invite also industries, because I'm a firm believer that solutions come from industries, that industries have the innovative capability to bring solutions. And in Holcim, this is what we've done. We've done and brought near-term solutions to construction as well as long-term, so I'll come to that. I'm in the construction industry. Construction industry accounts for more than 30% of the CO2 emission in the world. So there is an urgent need. There's more urbanization, more people on the planet. Cement is not substitutable. And we need more houses, we need more schools, we need more hospitals and more infrastructure. So we need to go fast in providing solutions in order to get construction sustainable. We have started to really segregate all the capex we do, all the investments we do, that having the purpose to get ourselves more sustainable. And we have launched financial products such as sustainability-linked bond in order to say, well, this money we're going to borrow is going to serve for this and this specific projects that are going to allow us to lower our carbon footprint. And I'm the CFO. I'm making sure we have a proper reporting also on all these data, so as to allow the borrowers, the investors, to track and see the progress made when it comes to our decarbonization. So that's an example. And of course, when it comes to the long term and the net zero future, then we will require more financing and more partnership. It will be about carbon capture storage, which is the only way to capture the process emissions that you have when you heat the limestone. And there we will need subsidies, we will need public funding, we will need investors to realize that we have a model where if we save CO2 rights in a framework like Europe, for instance, then we will receive rights that we can monetize and use that money, for instance, to fund other projects in other countries. And that's where we need to come, where we need, that's the direction we need to take.
Thank you very much. Just on that, can I just ask you to pass the microphone to Professor Koundouri? Could you just speak a little bit about, we've heard from Géraldine in terms of the private sector focus. Could you just reflect on linking that with the original talks that Professor Sachs and Dr. Mahmood did in terms of concessional finance, bringing public and private money together?
Well, when you're thinking about financing, you need to think about the sources of your financing. So you have both public sources and you have private sources. It's one thing to ask for additional public finance, but even what we have now, we are not using well. So what is needed is the following. We need to identify which are the parts of our investments, the needed investments, based on the SDGs. The targets within the SDGs allow us to define an investment plan for each country. This investment plan has public good characteristics, that is, it concerns investments that are difficult to be channeled through private routes. So this part has to be taken up by the government through the fiscal space that the government has or is enabled by multilateral institutions and so on. There is the other part of investments that are private in nature. The benefits are easily captured by the private investor. That part can be invested by the private sector. So in this way, we identify optimal public-private partnerships that can really allow the financing of the implementation of the SDG-based plan. What is crucial in this process is the following. You need to have a very transparent and science-based way to measure the impact of the investment against the SDGs, not just ESGs. ESGs are about the environment, the society, and governance. But one crucial aspect of any investment is financial sustainability, both in the public sector and in the private sector. So the CFOs and the sustainability managers need to talk to each other, and they need to do this discussion on the basis of the whole value chain of each project and each product. So under UN SDSN and under the Alliance of Excellence for Research and Innovation on Sustainability that I lead, and under the SDSN Global Climate Hub that I lead, we have developed a platform that allows this detailed SDG transposition of the different investments based on a whole value chain approach, and not just investments in the real economy, but also doing that for asset management and allowing to build portfolios that are efficient, not just in terms of market risk, not just in terms of size of the company, not just in terms of the book value of the company, but also in terms of each SDG. So we are using the pharma CAPEM in order to create portfolios that are efficient against the SDGs. In order
Phoebe,
to prove, and I'm
you need
concluding,
to finish. No, you
in
need to
order
finish.
to showcase how SDG investment can really support profitability, both for public and also private companies. And the profits need to then be distributed in a way that supports the cohesion of the society. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can I come this way, Peter? Can I just ask you, because there was Phoebe, could you just hand over the microphone? Thank you. Because there was a strong distinction there in terms of private investment, public investment. One of the challenges we have here is very much around how do we use public investment to leverage private investment so that we actually bring in much larger volumes of funding. Can you just reflect from your position as President WBCSD how you see your industrial members, your business members playing on this piece?
Yeah, thank you. I listening to the people before me, there are two conversations at the same time. One is, how can we help accelerate finance and therefore the transition in emerging markets? And if you unravel that, there's massive financing necessary. But if you look at project level at the moment in emerging markets, the cost of capital for renewable energy is 6 to 8 times higher than the cost of capital for renewable energy in Europe or in North America. And that's the reason why finance doesn't flow. So I'm very much with Mahmoud. We should give the World Bank and regional development banks much more capacity to fund, but I wouldn't stop at funding country levels because I don't think that will solve the issue. I think we need to go down to project level and use that increase in funding to de-risk the projects, and as a result of the de-riskment, bringing the cost of capital right down to the level of developed markets. So that's project level intervention with more public money in. The minute you bring the cost of capital of renewable in emerging markets to the same level as in other places, the funding will flow. Private funding will flow in, but they're not, as private entrepreneurs, going to crack the code. The second thing, and I'll be quick, we should not make the mistakes, and that's the second conversation, that this is an emerging market issue. I mean, Holcim is doing great work and some other companies, but it's not true that developed market companies are moving anywhere near the pace that we need. Accenture published a report a few days ago saying that 7%, is that you? 7% of companies are likely to hit their 2030 decarbonization target. And there the answer is, we need to get much tougher on disclosures. So carbon accounting needs to be better, Scope 3 accounting needs to be put in place, and ISSB needs to become the mandatory global baseline so that we can actually see who makes progress and who does not.
Thank you. Could you pass the microphone along to Irina? Because I'm very keen, if we're talking about the practicalities of funding and finance. You know, you're in charge of a big investment fund. From your side, getting from the learning scale that Géraldine talked about, you know, CCS projects, how do you then scale them up? From your perspective, how do you get into that much more granular level that Peter has also talked about at the project level, or what we see in Climate Kick at the city and region level, which is a massive demand for funding and finance, but where either the cost of capital or indeed the capabilities are not there to bring in the type of financial structures that allows you to scale and replicate and scale across multiple cities, multiple regions, multiple countries. Can you just talk a little bit about your experience about how you might tackle that?
Absolutely, thank you, Andy. It's a great question, and you know, I'm coming from the steel industry, and steel industry alone accounts for just below 10% of global CO2 emissions. I think in absolute terms, it's close to 4 gigaton of CO2 per year. We as a group pledged to become carbon neutral by 2050 and to get our emissions to zero. And it's a very capital intensive industry, so that implies trillions and trillions of investment for the industry. And of course, you know, this is something where number of issues, we are facing a number of issues, and technology and economics are one of the main challenges. So on the technology front, we do have clear pathways and roadmap how we're going to get there. So from the technology perspective, we also launched the fund to support some of those emerging and game-changing technologies. And the way I would look at it is we are transitioning. So we are going from old technologies to new technologies. We need to go from old infrastructure to new infrastructure, from old solutions to new solutions. What I'm facing, however, is that when it comes to funding, you can't approach funding of those projects with the old solutions. You also need to transition. And I'll give a couple of concrete examples. For instance, if you take an example of green hydrogen, and you look at where green hydrogen is now in Europe, it's close to 4 or maybe even above dollars or euros per kilogram of green hydrogen. For the steel industry, this number needs to be definitely below 2, even closer to 1. So we have this gap to bridge. And I must say this gap is narrowing over the last several years. And some reasons for that is, of course, technology advancement, and that's the reason we are supporting technologies. Another reason is scaling up, the carbon tax, other support, but still the gap exists. And then what I see in some of those projects is that, you know, you're trying to get financial institutions to come and look at your projects, and they can come with all sorts of spreadsheets and mechanisms. But, you know, if the price is this and the price we are willing to pay is that, you can be super sophisticated and very scientific about it. And at the end of the day, you will say it's not bankable. So you can't approach the new reality with the old mechanism and with the old funding mechanism. So I think that's one point, because also Peter was saying, you know, we are talking about acceleration of funding. You know, we're accelerating technology. We're really supporting some of those emerging and game-changing and breakthrough technologies. But we also need to revisit. We can't approach the future with the old funding and financing mechanisms.
Thank you. And then last but very much not least, Yannis, I wonder if you could just try and bring together these two conversations that are being had. You know, one around the macro scale, you know, we want more funding into the multilaterals, fine, that's agreed. But how then do we start to actually ensure that that money is going to the ground to deliver the sort of transformational change at a speed and a scale that we have never seen before to support businesses, communities, cities, regions around the world?
Well, I'll try to focus on a particular aspect of that. Dr. Mahmoud said we need everything that we do, it needs to be evidence-based. And evidence needs data. And everyone says we need to invest in new agriculture, in new this and new that. But no matter how much we invest in the actual solutions to the problem, unless we also think that all this needs to be supported by data, we won't be able to come up with accurate solutions. We won't be able to monitor correctness. You talked about knowing what is actually happening. And it's not because I'm a data guy. I'm the only digital guy among economists and others. But everything needs to be data-based. And the technology, in order to be data-based, exists, the digital technology exists, but the data is often missing. And it's missing because it's not open, because it is the ways it is acquired and disseminated is weak. And unless in all these financial plans and investment plans, we also think about investing in data infrastructures and then the corresponding computation infrastructures in order to put the models, put the actual analysis to come up with a descriptive and prescriptive analytics in place. All this, I think, will see a lot of money misspent. And opening up data is a very big initiative worldwide about opening up scientific data, which is a big first step. We saw it in COVID. Suddenly everyone opened up their data. And the fact that we got a vaccination in about a year is a miracle compared to the past, only because data were opened up by industry, by commercial publishers, and so on and so forth. If we don't treat the climate crisis and all the other SDGs as pandemics, so to speak, crisis that we need to open up our data, we won't get where we should go in the speed we need. And I'm talking about data infrastructures and computational infrastructures. We don't need to be from scratch. Already, countries, industry invest a lot in these, and we just need to federate them. We just need to be participatory in a distributed, federated infrastructures and invest not only in more iron, but also in data stewardship, because data, The Economist had an article a few years back, data is the new oil. We need to get rid of oil, but we need the new oil for that. So data infrastructures is key, and this we should not be forgetting. Thank you.
A key point. Okay. So before I open it up to questions from the audience, I just wonder if I could go down the panel and if you could just reflect on what is the best kind of out-of-the-box example that you have that supports, that overcomes some of these barriers in terms of financing at a very practical level, whether it's a project-based or seeing the concessional finance in order to lever in private finance. What's the best examples that you have seen in the work that you have been involved in recent years? Because again, I think we very much need to do that. This is a learning by doing model. We learn, we share, and we share widely. So I just wonder if you can just share what your experience of the best examples are. Peter.
It's not an example, but it's the most urgent thing we need to crack. We're not honest enough to each other. There is no IRR to make the world sustainable. If we think we can solve this on a financial case, we're going to fail. So we need a new valuation model. We need to integrate environmental and social impacts into the valuation. Lowering emissions should be a profit. Improving well-being of people should be a profit. Damaging nature should be a loss. That needs to be urgently cracked into the valuation model, and then you'll see an unleash of capital like never before.
I cannot have a finance model, but from my experience from scientific research, Europe has been for the past 20 years investing in pan-European research infrastructures in various fields, health, environment, energy, and so on. And coming together, the member states financing directly the development of research infrastructures has boosted what is called the European research area a lot. I can see from my perspective an equivalent effort, global effort, or if you want regional effort, Africa, Europe, Africa, Australasia, whatever, where everyone chips in from it's part of their budget, so to speak, to finance the activities that are targeting not blue sky research, but SDG research. And if we do this and we come together in an interoperable way, I think this will have a boost. So the European research infrastructures and the European Strategy for Research Infrastructures may have an example that needs investigation.
Okay, so as an industry, I'm thinking of two examples. We have started some years ago to replace the fossil fuel that you need in order to heat the plants to produce clinker, which is the basic raw material to go to cement. And we replaced the fossil fuel by waste, municipal waste. You need a lot to do that, to get the joules, but financially, this is a strong IRR, because usually you even can get paid for the waste that you bring to your plant. So that's one example where I think it's worth mentioning. And I would also mention when it comes to the process emission, where there it's, to get to net zero, we pledged, we were one of the first of the industry to pledge a net zero by 2050. But to get there at one stage, you'll need to capture these process emissions. There's no other way. And there it requires carbon capture, storage, and usage. And look, guys, there's none in activity as we speak. So we're going to finance prototypes. And there we need public funding. Because as you said, we can't get a business case on our own. And we need everybody to place. And we need several industries. It's not going to be only Holcim. It's going to be a consortium. It's going to be getting the help of other industries, either to reuse the CO2, but also to get a pure CO2, to liquefy it, and to transport it. The infrastructure needed is a huge financing need for the capture itself, but also for the transport of the CO2, and the pipelines will need. So there we will need to be innovative, and there we will need to have both our funding, but also public funding to get there. So that's kind of two examples I want to mention.
Thank you. Irina.
I'll actually build on this example because I have also a very similar good example on circularity, where we have a process where we take wood waste and we produce biocoal from this wood waste, and then we replace the fossil coal in the blast furnace with the biocoal, and we capture the off gases from the blast furnace, and through biofermentation process we produce bioethanol. And this is a fantastic example of circularity, because you use something which is a waste and you produce something which is sustainable transportation fuel or sustainable aviation fuel. So this is a great example where you can actually achieve reducing your CO2 emissions, come in with an innovative way of recycling waste, and produce something which is sustainable and useful. And two additional points I would like to make is this tool of green premium I was talking about, and I think it's very much to the point Peter was making earlier, should not be actually, I would go a step further. It's not a premium. I think we should just look at what we are taking as a basis, and that, did we factor in all the costs into this basis? Because if we do factor in all the costs, it's not a premium anymore. Renewable energy and renewable alternatives are actually then, will come at a discount. So I think this is another point, which is, it's about the way we approach things, because if we think it's an additional cost or it's additional premium, then we think that sustainability comes at a cost, and it's not the point, because there is also psychological and philosophical shift we need to make. And then finally to the point also around alliances, and I think it's great that Masamba and the team bring everyone together here. It's a good example of one of the great solutions when industry, science, academia start talking together on how to find the optimal solution. We have joined Breakthrough Energy Catalyst, which is a platform bringing together philanthropy, industry, public, private sector, and creating this blended funding mechanism of trying to support the emerging infrastructure. And I think this is a good example. I think it's a good start, but we need many more of those innovative solutions and approaches on how we collaborate through, cross-industry, but also private and public sector, academia and science together.
Thank you very much indeed. And just, I mean, I think from my perspective, first of all, just to thank the panel. I hope what you have heard today is a little bit both on the very high level, which is what are the big flows of finance that we need to up through the multilateral funds, the banks, and so on, but also the big challenge, and certainly from my perspective with the organization I work for, Climate Kick, the really hard thing is not looking at the big flows of funding, but how do you bring it down to make the practical changes in the cities, the regions, the industry sectors around the world, and actually finding the mechanisms for stepping the finance down to ensuring that we have the right funding in the right place to scale up the solutions or to replicate good solutions has been really problematic. And I hope this hour we've just at least started to dig into some of those issues, because they're the very practical, granular, hard implementation issues that we are seeing city by city, industry by industry, which is the only way in which we're going to solve this. So let me just finish by asking Masamba, who has been leading the Innovation Hub here, just to say the last few words and to thank him for pulling us all together.
Thank you. So I will start by thanking the panel for your great discussion. We have very interesting takeaway that we can get out of this interaction. So first of all, finance are available, but they are not accessible for sustainability. I think this is one of the very first things. And then to be able to mobilize more finance for sustainability, we need to have a combination of instruments. One instrument will not be enough. We need to combine policy, regulation, market, all these instruments so that we can redirect finance toward sustainability. The first element is, of course, to make accessible to MDBs more finance, because they are the one financing sustainability. And then policy instruments like internalizing externalities, and also, as it was mentioned by Peter, rethinking the evaluation model, which is a very important lever to direct financing. So it is also important, as it was mentioned by Irina, to bring new solutions, because we cannot build the future with the old model. So it means that investment in innovative solution, be it technology solution or other type of solution, will be something critical. So we have a very nice takeaway from this interaction. I would like to thank you and thank all the partners and the participants, and looking forward to continue this collaboration with the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub. Thank you all.